So the 2024 election is over, and as I've mentioned throughout the past year, even leading up to the election, one of the things that I wanted to do was speak with interesting people about politics and do more collaboration with people in the liberal and progressive sphere. And I'm making good on that promise by bringing on Kyle Kulinski, host of Secular Talk and Crystal Kyle and Friends. Kyle, how's it going, man?
It's going great, man. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So, you and I talked with your wife, Crystal, and Hutch, I think like a month or two before the election. And obviously, at least three of us, I think, I'm not going to count Crystal in this, but three of us were a bit more optimistic about how the election was going to go. We were all wrong. We were devastated by the results. So I guess first things first, let's start with the election. Okay. So obviously Donald Trump wins both the electoral count and the popular vote. Now, as of the current count, he has not won a popular majority. We keep hearing about landslides and crushing defeats and all this. Oh my God, he's got a mandate. But he has won both the popular vote and the electoral college. His party is set to retake control of the Senate and the House. So let's talk about the 2024 election. How do you feel about the results now that we're, a month out? What do you think? What happened, man? What happened?
I mean, I feel bad. I feel not good. To your point, yes, he won by about 1.5 percentage points. It's going to be the slimmest margin in the House since about 1930. It could be anywhere from like a 2-seat majority to a 5-seat majority. And, people are not always in Washington at the same time. So how much they'll be able to get done, I don't know. But yeah, I don't know. From my perspective, I really thought she would win because I did think genuinely that she ran a significantly better campaign than Hillary did in 2016. In 2016, I sort of felt that the Trump win might be coming. In my prediction the night before that election, I did have Hillary winning, but I had her winning by the slimmest of margins, 270 something. And I was warning everybody, I really think he can win. I really think everybody's underestimating him. This time around, I was the one who underestimated him because I thought she ran a good enough campaign. And I thought he ran the worst of his three campaigns. I thought his 2016 campaign was his best one. 2020 was his second best one. And I thought this one was the worst by far. And, it was pretty humbling for me because, I had a decent track record with predictions, but this was I was so cataclysmically off base that it shook my, confidence in myself for future predictions. And so I had to eat some humble pie on this one.
So right now you're kind of in the midst of some sort of like PTSD related like journey of like introspection, like, damn, who am I? What about my prophecies, my predictions? If it helps, I went through that in 2016 because I remember vividly, I lived in Louisville, Kentucky at the time, and I was sitting at a bar with some friends watching the election results come in, as one does. And I remember, I can't remember exactly where we were in the count, but it was narrower than I expected. And it was, of course, it was a weekday, right? Because it was the election. And we ended up like just, paying our tabs and leaving early. And I remember thinking to myself, it's going to be fine. We'll wake up the next morning. It's cool. I don't even need to stay up. I've had a couple of vodka tonics. I'm good. I wake up the next morning and, first thing I do is reach for my phone, and I remember so clearly Yahoo News, in upset victory, Donald Trump becomes 45th president of the United States. And I'm like, what the hell? Now, this was before I did content creation professionally, but after that, I was like, oh, fuck political predictions. So I've been living with that trauma for 8 years. So, man, I totally empathize. I guess my question is, first question, you say that he ran, in your estimation, the worst of his three campaigns. I'm still trying to evaluate where that was because I think in many ways he himself was the most unhinged and deranged he's ever been. But I've heard other people in our space say, actually, no, this is the most disciplined because he had Chris LaCivita, he had Susie Wiles. There was a discipline there for the non-Trump parts of the campaign. Do you see where they're coming from? Or when you say the Trump, you don't see it?
No.
Yeah.
He was on the debate stage saying they're eating the dogs. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets. He was talking about Arnold Palmer's cock. He kept repeating this idea that
his 9-inch. His 9-iron.
He kept saying, "I'm going to deploy the U.S. military to go after, my enemies within." And it's like, I don't know. I guess I projected my own sanity onto others and thought, "There's no way other people are being like charmed by this, right?" But I think that the part I missed is that I think Trump's like endless anger and his vengeance and his need for revenge and retribution, I read that as this guy's a selfish psychopath. I think there are plenty of voters who don't follow stuff very closely who just view that as, oh, he's really angry at the system and he wants to change the system. And so I'll end up supporting him. And I think those people misread the situation, but I also think there's sort of a lesson in there for Democrats that you need to reflect the public's anger. And then also the thing that Trump got right is that he had a narrative. His narrative is completely incorrect and wrong and even bigoted. He blames all the country's problems on immigrants and trans people and cultural elites. But the Democrats' reaction to that, I've always pointed out, they're very technocratic status quo manager types where it's like, look, we'll do our tweaks around the edges, but overall, line on graph go up and that's good. And that just doesn't match the fervor of the time. And you need to counter that Trump narrative with a left-wing version of that narrative. And that's why you've heard even some surprising people in the aftermath of this kind of come out and say, you know what, maybe I was wrong about Bernie. You saw David Brooks say this. You saw Jen Psaki say this. You saw some of the Pod Save guys say this. People who I wouldn't have expected to say it. James Carville, he came out.
Chris Murphy, Democratic Senator Chris Murphy, a top Biden ally. He's been, that's an elected official, not just a pundit, making exactly that same sort of point, which is leaning more into populist rhetoric than I think many of those people that you mentioned would ever have been interested in the past.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so that's the lesson there for Democrats is perhaps his anger, which we all viewed, I think correctly, as like really unhinged and really for personal reasons. And it was really about him trying to weasel his way out of the 91 criminal charges against him. I think other people who don't follow this very closely just thought like, I'm pissed off. This guy's pissed off. Yeah, sure. Why not?
So again, so much to unpack there. And I definitely want to talk about, when you and I spoke last, you made an interesting recommendation about rebranding as centrist. And I do want to revisit that because actually at the time I was thinking, man, my allergy to the word centrism just precluded that. But now post-election, I'm thinking, fuck, that might be the direction to go in. So I do want you to talk about that here in a second. But so we all agree, or at least you and I agree, this was not a landslide. This was a victory for Trump, no doubt. But as you say, a 1.5% popular vote swing. He's going to have I think a 53-47 split in the Senate. And like you said, a 2 to 5 seat majority in the House. This is among the most marginal victories, but still a victory nonetheless. Here's my question. Given that we have seen a wave of anti-incumbent sentiment across the globe, right? I think it was either the New York Times or maybe it was The Economist, one of these two major outlets, like they did an analysis, and every election held in a Western democracy over the past year, the incumbent party either lost outright or they suffered setbacks. They were either kicked out of power, like, the UK Conservatives, or they lost seats like Modi's government in India. So I guess my question is, are you worried that are we at risk of overlearning the lesson in the sense like Piers Morgan and others want you to believe that this is a mandate for Trump, but some would say it could have been anybody running against the Biden-Harris administration, and if they were seen as the outsider, it's not necessarily an affirmative case for Trump. How do you feel about that? Is this really indicative of Trump's prowess per se, or just that he was the challenger against an unpopular incumbent?
So that's a great question. I think that the one exception to that anti-incumbency wave, which is real, is AMLO in Mexico. And AMLO was on economic issues. He was pretty progressive, and he really sort of materially addressed the conditions for the working class there and increased the minimum wage, among other things. And so he was able to sort of weather that storm. And Claudia Sheinbaum ended up being the leader there now. So I think there are some lessons in the fact that him and his party were able to weather that storm. There are some lessons there. And to your point, I actually don't think we had to do that much different in order to win this election. So for one thing, under COVID, we had this massive expansion of the social safety net, which was actually really, really popular. So for example, for a while, you had eviction bans and extended unemployment and extra unemployment and foreclosure bans. And then, of course, they did the child tax credit expansion, which was super popular and reduced child poverty by nearly 50%.
The student debt pause, I think, as well. Like, didn't he?
That's
pause?
Correct. Yeah. and free school meals and extra food stamp benefits and Medicaid expansion. And we had all these things set up. And then it was like a hard out at a certain point. I believe all but like 2 or 3 of them are now totally gone. And I think when those things stopped, you really saw support for Biden sort of plummet, right? And then you mix that with the other thing, which I think would have been a total game changer, is if Biden was able to get through the original Build Back Better bill, I think Kamala Harris would have won, because that original Build Back Better bill had paid family leave and childcare and universal pre-K and free community college, and it expanded Medicare, and it had a higher minimum wage, and it lowered all prescription drug prices, not just like right now, I think there's like 10 of them and more over time, but it lowered all prescription drug prices. It expanded that child tax credit. So if you really want to put the blame on anybody in particular, I actually think Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema are more to blame for this than Kamala Harris, because they stood in the way. And if we got that Build Back Better bill through, it would have been the biggest transformation of the U.S. economy since FDR's New Deal. And I really think voters would have rewarded the Democrats for that. So really, it's not, to your point about like, hey, are we reading too much into it? I do think if either the social safety net expansion under COVID stayed in place, or Build Back Better got passed, or both of those things were the case, I really think we'd be having a different conversation today.
So you said so many things I want to touch on. I do want to close the loop on one thing here, which is, again, reading into things, what we do from here. Here's an interesting, I don't know if we want to call it a counterfactual or something to juxtapose. Consider this. Does the Republican Party ever really learn anything? And here's why I ask that. So they had that famous autopsy in 2012 where they were like, listen, we need to be more inclusive. We need to be more accepting, less racist and extreme. And then, of course, in 2016, what did they do? They went in a 180-degree opposite direction. They doubled down on Trump. They won. Then, of course, 2020 happens. He's the incumbent. He loses in large part due to COVID mismanagement. But then they double down on him again, Kyle, again. Like, the idea of definition of insanity is, doing the same thing and expecting a different result. They're like, no, we're going to triple, quadruple down. God damn it, we are going to stick with our man come hell or high water. And it works. So this is something that I wrestle with all the time. And we're probably going to touch on like more of this later, but do both parties, is there any advantage in either party or both parties actually doing things different? Or is it really only something that Democrats need to do? Because I am starting to labor under the impression that, trying not to like bitch about it, but it's true that Republicans and Democrats are held to different standards. And that in this political climate, Republicans can double, triple, quadruple down, and they get rewarded for it more often than not. And Democrats have to reinvent the wheel every election. Am I crazy? Or what do you think?
No, you're right. And in fact, one of the things I've said in the wake of this election, and I said it to Piers Morgan's face, among other people, and they look at me like I'm crazy, is that Donald Trump is one of the most divisive and unhinged and arrogant candidates in my lifetime. And he won 2 out of 3 times and almost won 3 out of 3 times. The lesson should be Democrats genuinely need to be more arrogant and more unhinged and more aggressive. You have to make your case. You have to be relentless on it. They don't budge an inch. If you disagree with Trump 1%, he's coming for your head, and he demands that you fall in line. And I would love to see the Democrats learn this lesson. You see people like Dean Phillips who've learned the opposite lesson. And he says, like, oh, we have to welcome MAGA into the tent and we have to be more kind. And it's like, no, you're misreading it completely. This is the guy who said he wants to deploy the military against us. Why all of a sudden would you genuflect at his altar? You need to be more aggressive. I've said this, that in 2016, I understood the notion of like, hey, let's find areas where we could work with them and maybe get some good things done on the areas where we agree. Now I am not there at all. In fact, I want triple the resistance that we saw in 2016, because this party is completely and utterly unhinged. You have Trump. I mean, just look at his record the last time in office. Massively cut taxes for the wealthy and corporations, lost 200,000 manufacturing jobs, even though he campaigned as the anti-outsourcing guy, net loss of 2.9 million jobs his entire time in office, 3 million people lost health insurance under him. He appointed more Wall Street CEOs and billionaires than any administration in history. He filled the NLRB with union busters, destroyed the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, stiffed 8 million workers of overtime pay, and that's to say nothing of his horrible warmongering foreign policy. And I'm supposed to hold hands and sing kumbaya or make the tent bigger or be kind to them? Are you kidding me? I want to be more unhinged. I want to be more arrogant. I want to make the case more aggressively than ever before.
Yeah, it's so. I mean, you're speaking my language here in the sense like it's so frustrating for me to hear. Again, certain things are like viscerally seared into your prefrontal cortex. So I remember vividly after President Biden won the 2020 election, I recall Fox News talking about how Democrats really should take the time in this space to be dignified and treat Republicans with dignity here and grace because, MAGA Republicans suffered an enormous defeat. The fuck your feelings party in 2016. The fuck your feelings. We drink from the font of liberal tears in our chalice, labeled liberal tears, and we delight in it. When the shoe's on the other foot, then they clutch their pearls and they want civility politics. And now they're doing it again here. I'm sure you've seen all over the place the Schadenfreude from MAGA now that they've won. And so the double standards to me are what really drive me nuts because obviously we have fundamental policy disagreements with Republicans, but we can't even come to the table if we don't agree on what the rules are supposed to be. And so I totally take your point. And I feel like so many people have memory hold Trump's disastrous first term. So if we can talk about that a bit more, because obviously they say past is prologue, right? What can we expect from a future Trump administration? What do you say to people? I know what I say, but what do you say when people are like, oh, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? Do you remember what year it was 4 years ago? Does
2020.
Does that shit not drive you nuts? Like, do you feel that, is it just Trump? What is it? Why do people and why have people forgotten everything you just said, the mismanagement of COVID, all the economic catastrophe that followed? What is it about him? Whereas Democrats can't get away with any of this shit, or liberals or progressives.
It's vibes. He's the vibes king, and also spare a lot of smoke for both mainstream media that does the both sides bullshit, and now what I call fake independent media. Your Joe Rogans of the world. He went on Andrew Schultz's podcast and Theo Vaughn's podcast, and JD Vance went on Tim Dillon's podcast. These like edgy comedians who are now right-wing adjacent. And all of these guys are 100% about vibes. They don't know the first thing about policy. Trump makes them feel good, makes them feel like they're, cool outsiders who are taking on the system, when fundamentally they are reinforcing the system every single step of the way. And so what I expect from Trump is exactly like the first term, except worse. He's going to do all of the horrible George W. Bush policies, the cut taxes for the rich, the deregulate, the warmongering. The element where it's going to be worse is on his authoritarianism. Because the first time he was in office, he did have some reasonable people around him who would try to get him to reel it in when he went too far. When he wanted to shoot protesters in the leg, the George Floyd protesters, and he wanted to invoke the Insurrection Act. He had the Mark Millies around him. He had other generals who were like, listen, man, we're not going to deploy the U.S. military on our own streets. Now he wants to surround himself, and he is, with complete and utter sycophantic loyalists who will agree with anything and everything he says. So when you look at like Kash Patel for the FBI, Kash Patel wrote a children's book that was pro-Trump. Kash Patel was defending Trump's most egregious and obvious crimes of taking the classified documents and storing them in the bathroom and storing them in the ballroom and obstructing justice in the process.
Did you see that Steve Bannon? Did you see that Steve Bannon appearance that he had, Kash Patel?
Yes, where he says we're going to go after the media, which is like, wait, I thought all you guys love Trump because you think Trump is pro-free speech. This is the most anti-free speech, anti-First Amendment thing I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, I mean, it's insane. Well, so that's my take on it too. Like, again, I'm not a prophet because here's my stance on it. Let's say some people say, okay, Piers Morgan, we're going to talk about him and Joe Rogan, by the way, because you've had some spicy interactions with both of them recently. But somebody like Piers would say, Kyle, listen, Donald Trump did some sketchy things in term one. I've criticized him a couple of times, Kyle. I've criticized him. I'm not a conservative, Kyle. I am a Bill Maher style liberal, whatever that means. And he would say, now Trump is concerned about his legacy. He's won, right? His ego is satisfied. So now it's about making peace and basically leaving office in 2028 or January 2029 as the greatest president ever. So he just talked a lot of shit during his campaign. He's going to take the job of governance much more seriously this term. My thing is, maybe it is true that all Trump wanted to do was win re-election so he could kill the investigations into him, and all he wants to do is fuck off in golf for 4 years. I would argue that even that, Kyle, is still a DEFCON 1 situation, because what it says is authoritarians like Trump who try to overturn free and fair elections, who stage insurrections, who engage in fake elector schemes and all these things, which you've talked about on your channel for years, that's effectively rewarded, right? So isn't even the quote unquote best case scenario under Trump where he doesn't fuck anything up because he's golfing the whole time, isn't that still pretty bad?
It's absolutely horrible. And I feel like we need to point out that even if Trump packs his administration with run-of-the-mill Republicans, right, you're still looking at an absolute catastrophe. Because these people, like, I love the notion people pretended like Trump was anti-war. How many times have you seen this online, particularly in fake independent media? If you believe Trump is anti-war, you literally have not looked for even 10 minutes into the subject. It drove me crazy. Biden gets endless shit. Kamala gets endless shit. Some of it is deserved. But also, I didn't see any of these people in fake independent media talking about, hey, Biden actually pulled out of Afghanistan. Everybody else just talked about it. I didn't hear them say, well, hold on. We went after Obama for doing drone strikes. Biden nearly eliminated the drone war completely. They don't. This is what I mean when I say they're all based on vibes. Because if you actually do the research, if you actually read about it, you find out very quickly Trump increased drone strikes 400%. He did way more drone strikes than Obama did. And Obama got more shit over drone strikes than Trump did.
And that's after rescinding the DoD policies that actually track drone strikes. So it's
Correct.
Entirely possible, Kyle, that there are more drone strikes and civilian casualties under Trump that we actually don't know about.
Exactly.
The increase that you're talking about is so stark, and it's just based on the limited knowledge we have.
2 years. We have 2 years of the 4 years, and that's what we know. And
100%.
These guys, it drives me crazy because they just don't care to learn the specifics. It's all vibes. And even if Trump fucks off, which would be great, it's still going to be the fourth term of George W. Bush. You're still going to get more tax cuts for the rich. You're still going to get more deregulation. You're still going to have a guy like Marco Rubio as Secretary of State, which is basically a lock at this point. He's definitely going to get approved. And what does he want to do? He openly talks about wanting to coup South American governments all the time. Like, none of this is okay. And even your worst possible Democrat is going to behave more intelligently than any standard Republican.
Yeah. So again, I totally agree to say nothing, of what it does in terms of incentivizing a future iteration of MAGA. This idea, you can in fact, be handed. Look, say what you want about President Obama, but he left Donald Trump a relatively good macroeconomic situation. Donald Trump drove it into the ground within 4 years, and that's actually modern economic history where Democrats have to come in and clean up the messes left for them by Republican presidents. Obama had to do it with Bush, Clinton with George H.W. Bush and Reagan, et cetera, so forth, Biden with Trump. So he's made all these messes. And even if he doesn't make a mess in term 2, what it says is that people who abuse the norms, who break the institutions, who commit crimes, who stage coups, attempted coups, fake elector schemes, that, hey, this is not a deal breaker. The American people don't give a shit, run for office again. And imagine what a cleverer version of Trump, a younger, smarter version of Trump could do. Somebody like J.D. Vance or a Ron DeSantis. And so to me, that's still a really scary situation. My question on the worst case scenario, we talked about, again, that's the best case scenario and it's still pretty bad. What do you say to people, Kyle, who go, listen, Kash Patel, the Plot Against the King book, it is super cringe. He says cringe shit. But listen, he's gonna moderate. There are institutional checks. The people at the FBI, they're not gonna let Kash Patel prosecute Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, secular talk because he's threatened to go after the media. Crystal and Kyle and friends, you guys aren't gonna end up in a gulag somewhere because that's not how we do it here in America. We have institutions, Kyle.
Oh, what's my reaction to that?
What do you? Because I know you hear that. I know you hear that because I hear that too. Don't worry about that. We have institutions.
I would just say it's a curious argument to make that, hey, whatever you do, don't take these people at their word. Please assume they're going to not do the thing that they're telling you directly to your face that they're going to do. I heard Sagar make that argument to Crystal on their show. And it's such a silly thing because it's like, okay, so you support these people on the hopes they'll not do the thing they're going to say they're going to do. It's like how low we've fallen. But even if they don't get to do the maximalist version of what they're trying to do, they're going to do some of it, right? And like, there's going to be consequences. There's going to be a chilling effect. And that's the part of Trump to be most afraid about is that, like I said, any dissenting voices in the room are gone. And they're going to find a way to try to do anything that he says he wants to do. I mean, even on the tariffs thing, right? On the tariffs thing, they say, oh, actually, technically, the president, for national security reasons, may have the right to do tariffs on his own. So he's going to call, this a national emergency, whatever, the fentanyl coming in here or whatever. Therefore, he gets to slap tariffs on anybody and everybody. And I am so sick of this double standard here where it's like Republicans always seem to find a way to get the thing they want done. And on the Democratic side, it feels like, oh, they're handcuffed and they can't do it for this reason and that reason, and the parliamentarian, and it breaks with the norms and this and that. And, that's why we're trying to like snap the Democrats out of it and to be fair, this did just happen with the Hunter thing where it's like, wakey, like they're going to do what they're going to do and they're going to be insane and they're going to be wrong. And that's the end of it. You just need to do the shit that you have to do. The idea that like, oh, Biden set a bad precedent by pardoning Hunter Biden. Trump already pardoned 5 corrupt goons in his administration and many others, and he's guaranteed to pardon the January 6 people, as he said he was going to do 400 fucking times. What makes you think Biden pardoning Hunter, it's going to be Biden's fault now when Trump does the thing he says he was going to do all along? And so I'd love to see, like, on the way out, I really hope Biden goes balls to the wall. I'm happy that he pardoned Hunter, and I really wish he goes even further. One of the things I've been saying is, he's been trying to do the student loan debt reduction a number of different ways, and it's been blocked in the courts, and parts of it have gotten through, but other parts of it haven't, and the Supreme Court is an obstacle. Why not just have the Secretary of Education wipe all the student loan debt off the books, get rid of any trace of it, and then when the Supreme Court says, hey, you can't do that, or Trump tries to go back and bring the payments back, as he's going to do, you say, sorry, we don't even know where the data is. We don't even know who has a student loan and who owes what. It's all gone. And by the way, this was part of my official duties. The 1965 Higher Education Act says the Secretary of Education could wipe out all the student debt that we hold. We hold like 96% of it. Sorry, it's gone. I don't know what you want me to do. It's part of my
throw the aviators on, give them the finger, and walk out the door.
That's what I want to see. That's what I want to see, because in your entire adult life and my entire adult life, the Republicans every step of the way have completely destroyed any semblance of norms or decorum or institutions or proper procedure. I mean, go think about Mitch McConnell not allowing a vote on Merrick Garland for the Supreme Court for a whole year. They just made up a rule out of nowhere. And everybody just went along with it. Like, no, we're not playing by these rules. If they're intent on throwing out the rule book, okay, let's throw out the rule book and let's see how that goes.
Yeah, so on so many of these, we actually agree. There are probably some things where I'm not sure it would work out. Obviously, we had a disagreement over, for example, the Joe Manchin thing. But like when it comes to Merrick Garland, and who, by the way, disastrous attorney general, as far as I'm concerned, perhaps President Biden's worst cabinet pick. He seems like a smart guy, seems like a nice guy. He was a well-respected judge. And believe it or not, he actually used to be a pretty badass prosecutor back in the day. But you know who Elie Mystal is, the progressive attorney?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So he wrote a brilliant op-ed in The Nation where he's like, Merrick Garland's prosecutorial mindset mutated into a judicial mindset where it's like, okay, I'm just going to sit back stoically, call balls and strikes. No, as attorney general, you're supposed to be the nation's top prosecutor. You're supposed to be a pit bull, a Rottweiler. You're supposed to be prosecutorial. And I think there's pretty compelling evidence based on investigative reporting that he dragged his feet in these Trump investigations. And not saying, obviously when you have the Supreme Court in your pocket the way that Trump does, I'm not saying necessarily that we would have seen a meaningful conviction here, but there are legal experts who believe, Kyle, that Garland could have fast-tracked this, or at least could have not slowed it down, that it was slowed down, and we would have had a trial and a verdict by the time of the election, even if the verdict had gone, maybe Trump would have been exonerated, maybe it would have been a hung jury, but we would have had a resolution to these cases if Merrick Garland hadn't been such a feckless institutionalist.
Yeah, and you know what? I really think he was going down. We already saw a guilty conviction on his weakest criminal case. That was the New York one with the hush money payment and the fraudulent business reports with Stormy Daniels and stuff. We saw that. We saw in the civil cases in New York, the not the sexual assault one, but like the tax fraud, insurance fraud, business fraud stuff. He went down on that. He owes a lot of money over that. And then, honestly, the cases that remained, in my opinion, not a legal expert, but in my opinion, from what I've seen, they were the most slam dunk cases. The ones that he was found guilty on were already the toughest ones.
Right.
I mean, the classified documents one was, I mean, it was done. You had people moving classified documents at Trump's order from one place in Mar-a-Lago to another place in Mar-a-Lago. And this was after the FBI had repeatedly told him, you have to give those up. You're leaving us with no choice here. Eventually, they had to raid it. He gave some back. He didn't give all back. He shuffled them from room to room. This is classic obstruction of justice. Classic. You have Australian billionaires in Mar-a-Lago saying Trump was telling him nuclear secrets casually while at dinner. Like, what are we talking about here? And that's to say nothing of the January 6th stuff and the fraudulent elector slates, which is just preposterously illegal. So that's the crisis of all this could have been averted. I mean, I always say this to conservatives. There were originally 91 criminal charges against Trump. Are you going to sit here and look me in my eyes and tell me every single one of those 91 charges is complete and utter bullshit? And if you do believe that, you better explain to me in excruciating detail how and why every single one of them doesn't count. And they can't do it because they know they're wrong.
Yeah, so much of this is so gross, and you've touched on so many things which are really important to me. The Supreme Court, institutions, and I do want to explore this a bit more. So what they would say, as I'm sure you know, is, the Justice Department's weaponized, Kyle. It's just weaponized. And obviously we know that's not true. As a matter of fact, there have been forensic analyses done of the Biden Justice Department. There have been News Nation, Dan Abrams did this expose on it. There have been 11 major Republicans prosecuted under the Biden Harris administration and 12 prominent Democrats. President Biden himself was investigated by his own goddamn DOJ. Hunter Biden, as you say, was investigated, prosecuted, and convicted. And then
Menendez.
Bob Menendez, Henry Cuellar. And so the facts just simply don't bear this out. As a matter of fact, Biden could have killed the investigation into Hunter. Like when people say, again, full disclosure, my thoughts on the Hunter Biden pardon, I'm not going to lose sleep over it. Do I think it was an abuse of presidential power? Perhaps, since it was for his personal, his family, but there's also credible reason to believe that those charges would have never been brought against Hunter Biden in the first place had he not been Joe Biden's son. And so when you compare all this in the context of the shit that Trump has done with the pardon previously, which you pointed out, Paul Manafort, Roger Stone, Steve Bannon, what he's promised to do, J6 defendants himself, I would be stunned if he didn't pardon himself or didn't try to.
Right.
Especially with the Supreme Court precedent that, these core constitutional powers are non-justiciable. What's a core constitutional power? The power of the pardon. I can't imagine that the Roberts Court, if Trump pardons himself and Democrats want to challenge it by saying this is unprecedented, this is clearly not what the founders intended, do we really believe that the Roberts Supreme Court would say, yeah, sure, it's not said anywhere in the Constitution that you can't pardon yourself, but this does seem pretty scummy and corrupt? No, they would never be a check on Trump in this respect. The Hunter Biden thing means nothing to me. But I do want to focus a bit on Merrick Garland, just real quick. Do you believe that he was a bad attorney general or the wrong man for the time?
I mean, yeah, just solely based on the fact that, he dragged his feet for too long and that helped get us to where we are. Yeah, I think it's fair on that alone to make that point. But even to the point on weaponization, I mean, look, at this point, I would say so it could be a weaponized Department of Justice, and what they're doing could still be correct, right? Like, and this is the point I would make to Republicans, like, oh, you guys are focusing on Trump and you're weaponizing the DOJ. And it's like, okay, if you want to call it that, he's still a criminal who committed 91 crimes and he should be brought to justice. And so I almost want to blow up the entire framework of the conversation and just get to the meat of it, which is like, yeah, he's being prosecuted because he committed crimes and he deserves it. So even if you say, well, they had a pre-existing hatred of Trump that led them to look under every rock and try to find a crime, it's like, okay, and they found 91 of them. So who cares?
Right. And honestly, but again, what's funny is the evidence actually says to the contrary, that they went out of their way. To your point, under Merrick Garland, the FBI and the National Archives were dragging, you could feel the palpable fear of like, fuck, we do not want to prosecute this guy. Please give us the goddamn documents back, please. As a matter of fact, the documents he did give back, Kyle, he was never prosecuted for. That's the tell right there. They actually, the ones that he occasionally gave back, they didn't slam him for, even though they had the power to do so. It was that final obstruction of justice, which resulted in the FBI raid up Mar-a-Lago. But that was a year. Merrick Garland dragged his feet for a year with the January 6th investigation as well. So I think that he will rightly be reviled by future generations, not personally, but as a man who was kind of this feckless institutionalist. And on that subject, since you mentioned Merrick Garland, as a potential Supreme Court justice, I do want to talk about the Senate there for a minute too, because this is where I think that Democrats, or more, I don't want to say, more combative liberal/progressives like us really have a point, which is the corrosion of institutions under Senate Republicans. So you mentioned the classified documents case. And I don't know if we had a chance to talk about this, but The reason that landed in front of a Trump appointee in Florida, Eileen Cannon, a district judge, was because there were district judicial vacancies in Florida that Biden tried to fill, but was blocked by Senate Republicans because of a thing called the blue slip. The blue slip is this, like, basically it's a decades-long gentleman's agreement, which says that if a president tries to nominate a judge in a senator's home state, that senator can effectively veto it. They can say, Mr. President, I don't like this particular pick. Can you pick somebody else? Trump wins in 2016. He gets into office in 2017, Kyle. So do Senate Republicans. The first thing they do is shred the blue slip rule for circuit judges, which allows Trump to cram in his nominees over Democrats' objections. They shred the tradition. Dick Durbin and Senate Democrats had the power to do the same goddamn thing for district judges. They could have said, hey, listen, you started this tradition for circuit judges. We're going to continue the tradition for district judges. And since we're in the majority, we can get it done. But because Dick Durbin preserved that norm of the blue slip, it meant that every time Biden tried to nominate a judge in Florida, Marco Rubio and Rick Scott blocked them. And so I look everywhere. It's not just the big stuff with Supreme Court justices. It's also this shit too. What is it? What do Senate Democrats just not understand about some of these things, like the filibuster and these forms of anti-majoritarian control? What do they just not get? Because it seems like they're like Charlie in the football. They constantly go for it. What are they not getting?
What they don't understand is that Republicans don't mean a word of what they say, and Republicans understand politics is about power. It's about power. So Republicans say, we're going to get done what we want to get done by any means necessary. And we will not hold ourselves to any standards or rules. We're going to find a way to follow through. We're going to find a way to get it done. Democrats kind of fell in love with process. They fell in love with the rules. They fell in love with this idea that there's one standard and we're all going to hold ourselves to that standard. But there's a problem there because Republicans only say they believe in the rules and the standards, if even that, and then they don't abide by them in any way, shape, or form. And so if Democrats really want to evolve and get with the times, they really, really need to be a lot more like Republicans, because understand something. Republicans are going to do what they're going to do anyway. It has no bearing whatsoever on what you Democrats do. Okay? You're a hypocrite. They're like, we don't care. We got what we wanted through. We don't care. Call us hypocrite all you want. Doesn't mean anything to us. So Democrats, I was actually talking to Crystal about this the other day. I said, not only should Democrats get rid of the filibuster, but they should have gotten rid of the filibuster with a rule attached to it that when Republicans are in the majority, the filibuster is back.
Yeah, they should break the key off in the door almost. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And make them, okay, fine. Then they'll get in there and they'll get rid of it when they're in there. And it's like, okay, well, then we're back to at least 51 votes beats 49 votes. But there's this sort of institutional brain rot that everything, the rules are what they are now. And the assumption is, well, it's like that for, some logical, rational reason. And it's like, oftentimes these things are completely arbitrary. So the first filibuster was in 1837. And so it wasn't with the founding of the country. And back then, you had to talk. You had to actually filibuster. We don't have the talking filibuster anymore. Even just getting back to that would be a good thing. Now all you have to do is declare, I am going to filibuster. And then they need 60 votes.
And then it's the majority party that actually has to go through the effort. To your point, at least the filibuster back in the day put the burden on the filibustering party. We don't even do that.
Correct. And so a lot of people might not know this, but the filibuster was reformed in 1996, 2011, 2013, 2017, and 2019. There are 161 exceptions to the filibuster. This is completely and utterly arbitrary. Okay, so it like to sort of handcuff yourself to these rules, which in many instances are an impediment to you getting your agenda done. Nobody's going to give you a pat on the back for that. Nobody's going to tell you, thank you for your service. You have to get your agenda through and you have to fight. And I think Republicans fight for all of the wrong things, but their voters appreciate the fact that they fight. And it's, Democrats got to wake up, man. They got to wake up.
Yeah, it's so frustrating because, again, I look at the filibuster as an example, and I hear people all the time who are, listen, and I'm sure you would describe yourself the same way. I'm not anti-institution. I recognize that in order to have a functioning republic, a functioning democracy, you do need institutions. But the whole point is there has to be a degree of reciprocity. And if you and I believe in institutions, but the other team doesn't, then we're just two assholes. We're just like, what are we? We're just two guys like wasting our time. The whole point of institutions is norms that they have to be reciprocated. And so I see Democrats being hoisted by their own petards here. That the alien cannon example is just so telling. And now that Republicans are back in the majority, I wouldn't be surprised if day one they're like, hey, back in 2017 when we killed the blue slip rule for district judges, we're actually going to do it again for circuit judges. We're going to do it again for district judges as well. So President Trump can cram through every nominee he has. And Dick Durbin's going to be standing there with a surprised Pikachu face like, you guys said you wouldn't do that. And the rest of us are going to be like, Dick.
Yep,
by the way,
that's right.
To me, he embodies, are you familiar? You're familiar with Dick Durbin, right?
Yes, of course.
Does he not embody to you the fecklessness of just reflexively, aggressively institutionalist Democrats? He's the first one I think of more than any of them, of somebody who's just a slave to the institution.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think if you go back and look at a modern history, believe it or not, it was actually Harry Reid who was pretty solid. He was way better than Dick Durbin.
And Schumer. He was better than Schumer.
Correct. Yeah. And I mean, again, just to put a fine point on it here, it was Mitch McConnell who blew up the notion that you need 60 votes for a Supreme Court nomination. They made it 51. And they did that because they were like, we're not going to get it done if we don't do this. So they just blew it up.
But Kyle, to your point, they blamed Harry Reid for that. They were like, we wouldn't have done it if Harry Reid had modified the filibuster so that President Obama could have his nominees. And that's the other thing, too. I hear people all the time, even so-called centrists, and I do want to talk about that. We're going to talk about the centrist rebranding and then the media. Mm-hmm. But I hear people all the time say, it's actually Democrats' fault that Republicans break the rules because Democrats are the ones that they slap first. If Harry Reid hadn't modified the filibuster so President Obama could have gotten his judicial nominees, his executive nominees through, then Mitch McConnell wouldn't have adjusted the filibuster for the Supreme Court. I just think it's bullshit, and it totally robs the Republicans of their agency. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think if you go back and actually try to trace the history of it, it all comes back to Newt Gingrich. He was the first one to really come in as this absolute crusader. I have zero interest in any sort of bipartisanship, and he was a right-wing crusader. He, in many ways, was Trump before Trump. And from him on, the Republican Party really took on almost like a revolutionary spirit of revolutionary conservatism where they don't care about the rules and the norms and the institutions. And so look, it's that simple. They started it. And I'm more than happy to go back to a system where everybody does abide by the rules and cares about the institutions, but they've proven for multiple decades now, it's not them. So Democrats either need to evolve or keep getting their asses kicked. And I think we both know we'd prefer them to evolve. Yeah,
desperately. So on the notion of evolution, when we spoke last, you mentioned that perhaps a broader strategy could be couching progressive policy or populist policy in the veneer of centrism, right? So could you expound on that a bit more? Because again, when we first talked about it, I'm like, man, I just have an allergy. Anytime I hear centrist, I have such contempt for the word. As I'm sure you do. But hey, maybe it's good PR, maybe it sells, and I'm certainly more open to it than I was. So can you make your pitch?
Yeah. I think you saw a version of this with Trump where one of the lines he would always go back to in his speeches, at his rallies and interviews is, we're in favor of common sense. We're just all about common sense. That's sort of his version of this thing of like, look, if you disagree with me, you're weird, you're the freak, you're wrong. And I really think the left does itself no favors by embracing the optics and the affect of radicalism. I very famously, even back in 2015 and 2016, I criticized Bernie for describing himself as a democratic socialist because the word socialist in the US is not viewed positively by the public. They don't like it. They don't like the word socialist. And so why would you take your policy views and your positions, which are actually right in the mainstream of American opinion, and basically also label yourself something outside of the mainstream of public opinion? You're just asking it's a harder sell, right? And so this is something I've been harping away on for a while now, but in some ways, I really do think I am a centrist. I am a moderate. If you define centrist as right smack dab in the center of mainstream American opinion, I don't think anything that I'm talking about is out there is unpopular. Look at the polling on raising the minimum wage. That always is very, very high. Look at the polling on universal health care. I mean, obviously, it depends on how you phrase it, but if you phrase it in a way that I think is relatively neutral and fair, the polls are through the roof on that. And so I think any sort of democratic policy platform that's a winner is going to include a lot of things which seem to be really forward-thinking and really progressive. But if you actually poll it, it's like 55% to 75% of people agree with it and would like it. So, yeah, I believe it now more than ever that you need to, because the message, if you say that, look, I'm a centrist, I'm the moderate, the message you're putting out there is the Republicans are the extremists. And they are. And they are. The things they believe, the things they're fighting for, it's ugly. And so why not also wrap yourself in this armor of, look, I'm with you, the average American, and I'm just a vessel for you and what you want. And so when we go out there and we say things like, I brought this up a lot recently, Democrats should be arguing on the campaign trail that we want the number one infrastructure in the world. Yes, Biden did an infrastructure bill. That's great. He deserves a lot of credit for that. Why aren't we thinking bigger? Trump has his Make America Great Again thing, and the right seems to like that. The left-wing version of that should be, we want to be number one in the world in infrastructure. We want high-speed rail everywhere. We want the best airports in the world, ending the corruption and getting clean elections, so publicly financed elections, universal health care, higher minimum wage, even something like 4-day work week, which polls tremendously popular. And in all the pilot studies, it's basically been proven that productivity stays the same or even goes up in some instances. Eliminating medical debt and Social Security for all, like a UBI check. Like, these are all things people would really like it. And you should couch it in the language of centrism and moderation so that everybody who's against it is sort of de facto labeled as, why are you being extreme? Why are you against the obvious positions?
So again, obviously, especially after the results of the election that we just suffered, I'm much more receptive to that now, because I think, Will Stansel has been harping on this for a while when it comes to the economy, the so-called vibe session and vibeonomics. And I actually, quite frankly, I think there's a lot of truth to it. Not to downplay the real material hurt that a lot of people experience as a result of increased prices. But, historian Heather Cox Richardson said to Jon Stewart recently that her concern is that for all the failures of the Biden administration in the Democratic Party, President Biden was in many ways the least neoliberal Democratic president in decades. And her concern is, and this is Tom Hartman's concern too, that because Biden wasn't rewarded for it, this is going to send the wrong message to Democrats, that they're going to, like, you know what, fuck this. Fuck that. We're just going to tack more to the right, or we're just going to embrace more neoliberal policies because we tried a more progressive or more populist economic policy and we weren't rewarded for it. And this has to be transactional. If we give you a bit of what you want, you need to vote for us. So can you talk about that as well, and how it would relate to your messaging? Because it sounds like you would want more ambitious policy programs than what the Biden-Harris administration offered. But how would you, I guess, make it clear that, hey guys, if these politicians do it, you got to vote for them. You got to reward them. Otherwise, they're going to totally walk away from that.
Yeah. So like I actually said up front at the beginning of the conversation, I really do believe if the original Build Back Better bill got passed, I think Kamala would have won. And also, I think if the expansion of the social safety net that happened under COVID, if that was still in place, I really think the Democrats would have won. So in other words, I think that if you did address people's material conditions in such a strong way, that they would have been rewarded for it. But to your point, because you actually have a really good point, that some people are going to look at this and say, well, hold on, he broke from neoliberalism and he lost. So why wouldn't the takeaway be more neoliberalism? Well, there are a couple answers to it. One of them is a lot of the great policies that Biden did, they are genuinely long-term policies, right? So like the CHIPS Act, for example, phenomenal bill. It's going to be a while to get the full impact of that bill. The infrastructure projects, great thing. It's going to be a while to get all the benefits of that. And again, one of the just horror shows of all this is that Trump's going to take credit for a lot of these things that happen. And it's going to be infuriating. So that's part of the problem, is that it's long-term stuff. But there's another answer to your question here, and this one should be easier to address, but we live in hell, so maybe it won't be, which is, look, there is a genuine media problem here, right? There is a real media problem. And I remember it was a real slap in the face to me when I actually saw Biden doing some really good economic policies and seeing how everybody in independent media who pretended to be all about policy did not give credit where credit was due. I wanted to pull my hair out because, so for example, you had student debt reduction, which he fought in multiple different ways to get. You have the $1,400 stimulus checks that they sent out. You have, as we mentioned before, the pullout of Afghanistan, massively reducing the drone war. But they did project labor agreements for 200,000 construction workers, which raises their pay.
Lena Khan, just Lena Khan.
Lena Khan alone is phenomenal. But the Democrats also overturned a Supreme Court decision that would have stopped the EPA from regulating all carbon emissions. They slipped the provision in the IRA.
Didn't they do that? Yeah, with just clever writing in the IRA.
That's exactly right. Biden did a $15 minimum wage for federal contractors and employees, which impacts about 400,000 people. They did that gun reform, which closes the boyfriend loophole and funds red flag laws. You pointed out the NLRB, the PACT Act, which was healthcare for veterans exposed to toxic burn pits. They added 800,000 manufacturing jobs and the CHIPS Act and 15% corporate minimum tax rate when before you had some corporations paying nothing or even getting a negative income tax, which is just a subsidy. You had $64 billion for Obamacare and they banned junk scam temporary health insurance plans. They had the NLRB rule to increase unionization. We can go on and on here, but it was a real black pill moment for me when I saw Biden doing these things that are genuinely good economically, and you didn't see any real talk about it on CNN or MSNBC, which I don't know what you want to attribute that to. Maybe it's laziness, maybe it's ignorance, maybe these people are not real policy wonks and they're not following this stuff. You got the same both sides bullshit out of CNN and MSNBC. And then in so-called independent media, it was very clear to me at that point in time, oh, this is fake independent media because these people don't give a shit about policy. And so there's a real messaging problem where you need to get the truth out there. You have to spread the reality of the situation. And I think just think for a second, if the left had, a media ecosystem that was at least comparable to that on the right, everybody would have been praising Chairman Biden when he got the CHIPS Act through and when he got the infrastructure bill through and we created 800,000 manufacturing jobs. You would never hear the fucking end of it. And then also, I don't want to let the politicians completely off the hook here because Biden, as he got older, he was really unable to even make his own case. He would rather talk about AUKUS and NATO than go out there and say, I created 800,000 manufacturing jobs, Jack. And, Kamala too. It's like, if Republicans never do anything good, but you bet your ass in the one instance out of 1,000 where they do something half decent, you're going to hear about it from now until the end of time. And we just don't have that messaging echo chamber on the Democratic side and among the liberals and the leftists. And that's part of the problem.
No, so listen, man, you were spitting there. Just a couple of things worth noting. One of the things that I preach about a lot of my channels that facts don't speak for themselves. Certainly not in this media ecosystem. They really don't. I do think Democrats have that mindset. Like, okay, all we have to do is, duck our head down. We squeeze the majorities to the best that we're able. And again, Biden on domestic policy, I think that, obviously huge principal disagreements with him on foreign policy for a lot of people. Mehdi Hassan, someone I follow, is someone who, like you, manages to walk this tightrope where he gives the Biden-Harris administration all the credit they deserve for domestic, accomplishments, but then take principled stances against them on foreign policy disagreements. But so much of this, I think, just came down to President Biden thinking, okay, I just do the work and the work will speak for itself. Fuck no, it does not. It may never have, but it definitely doesn't do it now. And we hear this all the time with people who years later still remember that Donald Trump signed a stimulus check that really, in large part, was attributable to House Democrats and Senate Democrats. But he put his fucking name on it, and he understood that. And I understand that is tacky. Is that tacky? Is that what I want presidents and heads of state to do? No, but that's the world we live in.
That's right. You have to do it.
Yeah, you have to do it. And so that's the frustrating. You said it. You said it. So it's going to be so. You're going to have an aneurysm, and I think I am too, covering this for the next 4 years, because every time a goddamn bridge gets built because of President Biden's infrastructure law, Donald Trump's going to be there with the scissors, right?
Yep.
And his Republican caucus is going to be behind him clapping the whole way. Mainstream media may, as a footnote, fact check it, but I expect that they're going to be lazy and just breeze right through it too.
And fake independent media is going to give Trump credit. They're
Right.
going to pretend like it's Trump. Joe Rogan's going to pretend like it's Trump. All these people are going to pretend like it's Trump.
So, and you teed up Joe Rogan there, so we're going to talk about him next. But I guess my last question on this particular loop is going back to the centrism thing. Do you? I think that there are very few things, and you tell me if I'm wrong. I think there are very few things that the big Democratic Party can do because it's so, it's not homogenous, right? And, you know, it's such a big tent party. So what works for like AOC in her district will not work for Tom Suozzi in his district, right? So would there be potential backfire from the more liberal flank, or the more progressive flank of the Democratic Party, if the Democrats started to brand themselves as centrist while still embracing the sort of progressive policies that you're offering? Like, could we suffer from the other direction, if that makes any sense?
Well, Pramila Jayapal, who's the head of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, she has actually been saying this longer than I have. She's been going with the, like, we're the real centrists, and that's why we support Medicare for all. That's why we support this and that. And so I don't think you will, but let's say for a second, for argument's sake, even if you do get incoming fire from whichever direction, you know, maybe Joe Manchin says, hey, wait, I'm a centrist and you're proposing universal healthcare. That's not centrism. This is where I think Democrats really need to take a lesson from Trump, which is Trump just does whatever the fuck he wants to do and says whatever he wants to say. And then if you disagree, it's like, fuck you, get on board or get the fuck out of the way. And so there's this notion of, like, in order to be a Big Tent party, you really need to cater to all the different aspects of that Big Tent party. But I actually disagree with that notion, because this election, Trump won. He built the bigger tent, both according to the Electoral College and the popular vote. And he built a bigger tent by just repping something. Now, we hate what he stands for and we'll disagree with it until we're blue in the face. But he represented something. He represented, hey, I'm against the immigrants. They're causing all the problems. I'm against the trans people. They're causing all the problems. And he would just, like a bull in a china shop, go right ahead. And you either hopped on board or you didn't. And I think that's sort of the vibe that the Democrats need to bring, which is, look, whoever is the standard bearer, this is what I'm saying. And if you don't like it, that's too bad, because we're moving forward and we're going to win. And you're either with us or you're not. But I'm not stopping.
Yeah, I'll say for my money at this point, I think we've tried we've tried so many different iterations of the more establishment route that this is the election cycle in 2026 and 2028 where we need to try to do something different. We need to try to innovate. And if it doesn't work, if what you're proposing doesn't work, if what I would rather see from more ruthless Democrats don't work, then we can do something else in 2030 or 2032. But for God's sakes, can we please try something else as much as possible? Is there a particular DNC chairman you'd like to see, like Ben Wickler from Wisconsin Dems? Who do you want to see either at the administrative level or at the public figurehead level? Who do you want to see step up and lead the Democratic Party?
So I'll say up front, I'm sure that there are multiple options that I would be happy with. And having said that, I haven't followed this particularly closely, but I do know there's one guy running. His name is Chuck Rocha. He ran the ground game for Bernie Sanders with Latino voters in particular, and he had a heavy emphasis on Nevada. And that was one of Bernie's best states where he had one of his most crushing victories. So this guy is an organizer's organizer. And I think he really has the proper vision, and he understands the direction the Democrats need to go in. And organizationally and institutionally, I think he knows how to dot his I's and cross his T's and get the job done. So my favorite would probably be Chuck Rocha. But having said that, I would imagine there's at least 4 or 5 people running who I'd be happy with. I would just try to avoid all, like, Rahm Emanuel and all of his sort of devotees.
David Plouffe, maybe from the Obama.
God. Let's pass on the people who are from a bygone era, is what I'd have to say.
What about as far as the candidate goes?
For 2028? Yeah, 2028.
Yeah.
Oh, I've said this everywhere I've been asked. Jon Stewart. I mean, I really think he sort of. I think on policy he's great, but I think he's funny, he's charismatic, he's a celebrity, and he really represents the kind of vibe and swagger that I think we need in this moment in an era that is incredibly populist and incredibly angry. I think one of the reasons Trump won is people just genuinely like the show. They like the show. They like that the camera can't stay off him. They sort of think he's funny and he says things that are wacky. And I think Jon Stewart mirrors all of that minus the bad policies on our side. And so I think if you put Jon Stewart in a Democratic debate, I think it's a bloodbath. And by the way, to be clear, I think there's some really talented orators on the Democratic side. I think Gavin Newsom and Pete Buttigieg are the closest thing you're ever going to get to a gamer debate bro in the mainstream political space. They're both phenomenal in one-on-one interviews and one-on-one debates with Republicans. Gavin Newsom gutted DeSantis in front of the whole country. Every time Mayor Pete goes on Fox News, he makes them look
and that was
ridiculous.
A 2v1. That was a fucking 2v1. That was, Hannity was trying to jump off with a chair from the top rope, and Newsom still swept.
Yeah, so there are other people with other strengths, but I think Jon Stewart is empirically the closest thing you could get to left-wing Trump. And he even has like some legislative experience. He very famously helped get healthcare for the 9/11 first responders who were having all these health problems. They were breathing in all that toxic dust when the towers came down. And, he has the right attitude. He has the right mentality. He has the right policies, and he's a fighter. And I really think he'd be special.
Yeah. So I that was during the Trump administration. I remember it so well, because Jon Stewart actually testified in front of Congress, and he lit them the fuck up. One of the best improvised speeches in Congress, and it didn't come from a Congress person. It didn't come from a man, reading off a teleprompter or speech. That was all extemporaneous speaking. And the PACT Act, which you mentioned earlier, Jon Stewart was a major reason that got through, because the people who are watching, that was a bipartisan piece of legislation, but bad faith Republican shitbags then pulled their support because they were pissed off at President Biden and Schumer. And Jon Stewart had to go on a shaming campaign. He went on Newsmax, bro. He was everywhere. Like, he was interviewed by anyone who would put a camera in front of his face, and he bullied the GOP into, expanding healthcare for veterans. So he totally
literally
agree.
bullied that through. You're right. I forgot about that. He literally bullied through the PACT Act because they had voted it down. And then he was like, fuck this. So he was calling out Ted Cruz by name, going after all the Republicans who voted against it, literally humiliating them in front of the country, and they buckled. And this is exactly what we're talking about. This is the kind of politics that we need, where you can use the bully pulpit and shame the Republicans with the power of the horde. But you need somebody who actually is in touch with the horde, with the mob, with the people and what they want, and somebody who's willing to represent them come hell or high water. And I think that's what he represents.
And I think Jon Stewart also has a lot of support from cohorts of voters that you wouldn't typically associate with at least today's Democratic Party. So again, he associates with a lot of blue collar workers, a lot of roughnecks, and in New York and other places, he was beloved by law enforcement and the military for precisely those reasons. So I totally agree. Now we just have to bully Jon Stewart into doing it. So totally agree there. That's the next mission.
I'm in, man.
Last questions I've got for you do concern the media, because this is something that everybody's talking about now. I'm talking about it. Destiny, you, Brian Tyler Cohen, David Pakman, Luke Beasley, everybody is just on this man, this whole fucking media thing has got to change. We are getting our asses handed to us in mainstream and alternate media because of the funding and the cohesion and the coordination from right-wing sources. In alternate media, you've got the Daily Wire and all their constituent contributors like Michael Knowles and Matt Walsh and Ben Shapiro. You've got Tim Pool, so many out there. And on that topic, you recently took a swing at metaphorically at a guy who I thought used to be a buddy of yours. You were on a show multiple times, Joe Rogan. So let's start there. So you called Joe Rogan out. Rogan is fake independent media, barely a comedian anymore, and he's morphed into state media for Trump. He's more like Rush Limbaugh than George Carlin. Man, you were feeling your spice that day. And then he responded to you. He said, former podcast guest here. And so did you see that?
So to be fair, that wasn't him. That's a fan account.
Oh, damn. Yeah. Was it really?
Yeah, gotcha. But it's one of the bigger ones. So gotcha. A lot of people thought it was him.
Yeah, I saw that too, and I'm like, oh shit, okay. So do you think that bridge is torched between you and Rogan? Because I haven't seen you on in a couple of years, and you were on multiple times.
Well, yeah. So a couple things. First of all, I'm a very introverted guy, contrary to popular belief. And whenever I have to go anywhere, my reaction is like, oh, I gotta go somewhere. I'm one of those guys. So I went on because it was a cool thing to do, and I did it 4 times or whatever the hell it was. But every time towards the end, it almost felt like a chore. Oh, I got to go do this thing. God damn it. So I really don't care about getting on that platform. In terms of the bridge being burnt, don't know, don't really care, because what's happened to him is humiliating and it's pathetic. I mean, he's sort of a classic example of what happens when you do politics by vibes, when you don't do any homework whatsoever and know anything about the policies. And I think the reason I'm so hard on him is because he fucking knows better. He sat across the table from me when I was making not only left-wing arguments, but making anti-Trump arguments to his face. And he would nod along in agreement. And he would regurgitate similar arguments to other podcast guests. There's a famous clip of him ranting against the hardliners on immigration to Duncan Trussell. There's that famous compilation of him saying all these left-wing things. I want universal health care, and I want free college, and I want this, and I want that, higher wages. And then like for you to go from Bernie in 2016 or 2020, I think 2020, and then go to Donald Trump in 2024, I don't buy this idea of like, oh, we should all be the Joe Rogan whisperer and like be really nice to him to try to get him back to our side. No, fuck that. I was the guy who, before anybody else was even paying attention, I was holding his hand and walking him through it slowly and explaining it to him like he was a fucking child.
Come on,
and he
Joe.
would nod along in agreement.
Come on, buddy. Come on, don't be scared. Come on.
And then, when I'm gone, then Ben Shapiro comes on a couple weeks later and he nods along in agreement to Ben Shapiro. And Steven Crowder comes on and he nods along in agreement with Steven Crowder. And then this fucking asshole comes on and that fucking asshole comes on. So the bottom line is he's a contradictory character. And he'll vibe with, mostly 95% of the time, he'll vibe with whoever he's sitting across from. But there is no ideological core. At the end of the day, when somebody is that contradictory, what it comes down to for Joe, how he makes voting decisions, is vibes. And I am waging war on vibes-based voters because it's not tenable and it's not serious. And people need to be better than that. And they owe it to themselves to be better than that. Because if you vote for people who are going to fucking destroy the country, and then 20 years from now, you look back like, damn, I probably shouldn't have cast that vote. Yeah, well, there's those of us all along who've been warning you to not go in that direction. So with Trump in particular, he likes the vibe. I think he's anti-establishment. I think he's anti-elite. I think he's anti-corruption and pro-worker and anti-war. Literally every single one of those things is verifiably untrue, and it doesn't take long to debunk it. And there's zero paying attention to the extremism of Trump, the extremism of Republicans. Now he's cocooned himself in a right-wing echo chamber. I don't know if you saw this, but recently he said he's going to go to Mar-a-Lago to do some podcasts, and Trump may pop in every now and then. And it's like, could you imagine if a comedian was like, I'm going to go hang out with Joe Biden at his vacation house in Delaware on Rehoboth Beach, and maybe he'll pop in every now and then. He would get roasted. Everybody would say that guy is a fucking hack, not a comedian, not funny, loser snuggling up to power. So that's why I said he's more like Rush Limbaugh than George Carlin. George Carlin very famously said, I punch up, I don't punch down. What's Joe doing? Going full Rush Limbaugh, where he's basically a right-wing radio host now, where every show is here. Jiu-jitsu move, let me tell you the 78 ways in which I think Democrats are actually worse than Republicans on absolutely everything, even though I have zero policies to back that up. So yeah, I'm just sick of those types of people, man. I'm sick of the vibes-based people. I'm sick of the fake independent media people. I'm sick of the people who pretended like, actually, I'm to the left of the Democrats, which is why I'm going to suck off Trump 24/7. It's like, that makes no sense. Get over yourself. Jimmy Dore, you're pathetic. Joe Rogan, you're pathetic. Other people like that, you are pathetic. You don't make sense. None of what you do makes sense. And it's time to end the grift.
Yeah. So I totally agree. I remember I used to watch Joe Rogan a lot. I mean, there's a reason the guy is as successful as he is. There's a reason that, the episodes I watched with you on and David Pakman on, they were really good. They were really entertaining. He's a good conversationalist. But yeah, this right-wing pivot, and it seems to be calcifying, to your point. He's not only going to Mar-a-Lago, where he bristled at the notion of having to go to the vice president, but he'll gladly pack up his shit and go to Mar-a-Lago, which, I mean, it's his right, but it's just like, okay, well, how much of this is really a principled stance of, no, my guests come to me versus me going to them. And the feedback loop that it creates, because he's the most popular podcaster in the world, and it's a lot of soft power. And I also like the fact that you rejected this notion that it's up to people not to scare him away, because we also hear that a lot about Elon Musk. Like, oh, the left actually had Elon Musk, but we scared Joe Biden. It's actually President Biden's fault because he should have invited Elon Musk to the White House. And I'm thinking, fuck that guy. The reason that Musk wasn't invited to the White House was reportedly because of his harsh stances on unions. It's not because Biden had a grudge against Elon Musk. It was because, hey, I can't pitch myself as the fucking pro-labor president and pro-union president if I'm cozying up to a man who is notorious. I mean, he's a scab, right? And so I'm so frustrated by this. And by the way, Destiny's pointed this out. I think you've pointed this out. Can we just talk about all these right-wing anti-Semitic dipshits complaining about George Soros all these years,
right?
Then cozying up to Elon Musk.
Yep, that's right.
Can we talk about that for a second? Like, I mean,
Yep.
And I actually think there was a clip that went viral, if I'm not mistaken. Man, I'm 90% sure this is true. That Musk was at some sort of Trump event. It might have even been at Mar-a-Lago. And they mentioned about our George Soros, the George Soros of the right.
Yep,
and he raised his hand.
Mm-hmm.
They don't give a fuck, do they?
They don't care. They don't care. It's all about power. It's all about power to them. And I'll say this about Joe. I'll ask you this. Ready? Trump went around saying the Republicans are the party of IVF and that he was the father of IVF. 48 Republicans in the Senate voted against the Right to IVF Act. Do you think Joe Rogan talked about that?
No, he did not. I would bet everything.
Do you think Joe Rogan talked about the fact that there are Republicans now openly discussing banning no-fault divorce, and J.D. Vance wanted to ban women who live in red states from crossing state lines to go to blue states to get reproductive health care? Do you think Joe Rogan talked about that?
No, and he certainly didn't talk about it when J.D. Vance went on, and I don't think he talked about it afterwards.
Correct. Do you think Joe Rogan talked about the 36 Republican senators in the year 2022 who voted against gay marriage, or the 169 House Republicans who voted against gay marriage in 2022?
Probably not. No.
No. Did he talk about the 44 Republicans who voted against extending the child tax credit, as J.D. Vance goes around virtue signaling saying he's in favor of the child tax credit, and he didn't even bother to show up for that fucking vote? Did he talk about that to J.D. Vance? Did he bring that up?
Probably not. No.
Right. Did he talk about red states that are banning, or the House Republicans that want to make it so that blue states can't do free school breakfast and free school lunch for kids? You think he talked about that?
No, and what a fucking shot at Tim Walz. Like, obviously, that is aimed directly at Governor Walz.
That's right. They're aiming it directly at Tim Walz. By the way, Joe has said horrific things about Tim Walz. He compared him to like Kim Jong-un. I remember covering that a while ago. He's now supporting a party that openly wants to ban minimum wage increases at the local level. In Texas, they banned extreme heat work breaks that used to be mandatory. They've gotten rid of that. As you know, in Project 2025, they talk about banning porn, cutting overtime pay, destroying the EPA and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. I'm sure you saw that billionaire asshole on Rogan's show the other day who was saying the CFPB does literally the opposite of what they do. He was saying they debank people when they protect people from being debanked. See, this is my problem with him, right? Like, okay, look, if you don't know anything about politics, fine, no problem whatsoever. Go talk about UFC, go talk about comedy, go do whatever. But if you're going to step into the political realm and you are a leader with literally millions of people who hang on your every word, then you better know what the fuck you're talking about, or people should correctly come after you and shame you for the dumb shit you say. And that's why I'm fed up with him. I'm fed up with him. He endorsed Trump and then Trump wins and he's all giddy about it. And it's like, this is not a guy who supported Bernie in 2016. This is not the same guy.
Yeah,
and this is inexcusable.
Something happened. I'm curious. Like, do you think it was like a lot of people speculated it was COVID, or it was the vaccine, or it was like there was something about COVID where we started to see this transformation in Joe Rogan? Or do you think it's just basic audience basically, do you think it was something internally within him, or do you think he saw where his audience was and just doubled down on it?
I think it's all of those things. So I don't know if you remember this, but a while ago, this was back when RFK was still in the presidential race. He basically said, I'm not a Biden guy. I'm not a Trump guy. I like RFK. And Trump's people unleashed holy hell on Joe's head. And he was shamed into coming out and say, whoa, I didn't mean it. What I meant was...
Just like Kyle Rittenhouse, by the way.
Exactly like Kyle Rittenhouse. That's what happened with Joe Rogan. So there's definitely an element of audience capture. There's definitely an element of COVID breaking his brain because he feels like the media was unfair to him when he got COVID and saying, oh, you're taking a horse medicine or whatever the fuck they said. And so what happened is he looked at that and said, now I'm just going to assume literally everything the media says ever is bullshit. And hey, who else hates the media? Well, Trump hates the media. Maybe this guy Trump is onto something. There's an element of that. There's an element of just literally everybody in his friend group now, they're all right wing. So, you have the actual right-wing commentators who he's friends with, but he's not that close with them. But he's in this friend group with a lot of comedians, and the comedians all fancy themselves like edgy comedians, anti-woke comedians, and they're either right-wing or right-wing adjacent. The UFC people he hangs with, right-wing or right-wing adjacent. Now he's buddy with fucking like Don Jr. and Dana White, who's his boss at UFC, is a super right winger and a big Trump lover. He basically admitted, Joe admitted, he felt pressure from Dana White to endorse Trump. So it's everything. It's like his friend group, it's audience capture, it's COVID genuinely breaking him in a way where he felt like, but by the way, I find that so funny, the COVID thing, because it's like, you're supporting Trump. Trump did Operation Warp Speed, right? Lockdowns happened under Trump. Lockdowns are these guys' number one enemy.
Bro, but that's what I'm saying. Like, a buddy of mine put this to me. He's like, Republican politicians, Republican influencers, and maybe Republican voters, but certainly the politicians and influencers, they just don't understand time, man. They don't understand time. Again, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? Objectively, fuck yes. Obviously, anyone who says otherwise is either an idiot or a liar, or perhaps both. But it's the same thing there too. To your point, Operation Warp Speed, like they have like done some weird Doctor Strange sort of shit with the timeline. It must have been Biden and the deep state and Fauci and George Soros who were responsible for the COVID vaccine. As a matter of fact, I mean, it's so funny that the vaccine is one of the few objectively good things to come out of the Trump administration, and the motherfucker can't take credit for it.
Yes.
And when the few times he tried was one of the few times he was actively booed at his own rallies. And listen, smart. If Donald Trump has intelligence in one, if he has a cunning in one area, it is staying with his base. So the second he saw that the vaccine was not popular, he dropped that thing like a hot potato and will not touch it. Yeah. It's insane, man. It really is. He is.
You're so right about that. And also, he really is the vibes master. You know, he's somehow perfected the art of, even though I lie with every word that comes out of my mouth, it's going to sound like the truth. It's going to sound like I really mean it and it's coming from the depths of my soul, and you hang on every word I say. And it just works. You know, it's literally like, I've said this before to Crystal, it's like old white man kryptonite. You know, by the way, my dad, I don't know if I've ever said this publicly, but my dad, so when him and my mom got a divorce, I was pretty young. I want to say I was like 12 years old or something like that. And then after him and my mom got a divorce, later on, he started dating this woman. Now, this woman turns out to be the head of the pro shop at one of Trump's golf courses, right? So my dad was able to get me and him on this Trump golf course when I'm like, 14 years old or whatever. I'm playing golf on a Trump course. This is before all the politics, of course. And I actually met him one time when I was like 14 or whatever. And he met him multiple times, I believe. And my dad died a while. He died in 2011, a long time ago. But I have no doubt if he was alive, he would have been the biggest Trump supporter. And he would have been in this really bizarre place of, man, I really love my son to death and I'm happy for his success and all this. But also, I fucking love Trump and he's shitting on Trump all day, every day. It would have been super awkward if he was still around.
So, I mean, that's an interesting story. I mean, obviously, first question I've got to know is how many times did Arnold Palmer's cock come up in that conversation? How many times on the golf course was Arnold Palmer referenced? That's first question. But the other thing is, like, to your point, like, so I grew up in, I spent most of my life in rural Kentucky, and I've got 4 sisters, and most of them are Trump supporters. And my eldest nephew, he's 18. He is also a Trump supporter as well. And so most of my friends and family members are Republican. And it's been challenging, but the one silver lining, and it actually meant the world to me. So my mother passed away back in 2018. She was 49 years old, and she was a Trump supporter, unfortunately, when she died. But she actually started to move away from Trump because she went abroad for the first time right before she got sick. And seeing life outside the United States, she came back with a different perspective. And so she was much more critical of Trump after spending a month in Germany for work because they hated him over there, understandably so. My father has a history of, he voted for President Clinton twice, voted for Al Gore, voted for John Kerry, voted for Barack Obama, voted for Mitt Romney in 2012 because the ACA hiked up my dad's health insurance premiums and he was pissed, right? And then he voted for Trump in 2016, voted for Trump in 2020. But January 6th was a deal breaker for him. And so the silver lining after the election was I got this text and he's like, hey, son, you know, I'm sure this is devastating for you, but he goes, I want you to know you did make a difference. He's like, because your old man went to the ballot box, and even though he was very tempted to vote for Donald Trump, he thought about it, and he ended up voting for Kamala Harris instead. And I was like, man, just even like that little thing, like that just meant the world at the time.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a great story. And you know, my mom is actually similar to your dad in some ways. She was born into a Republican household, was a Republican most of her life. And then in 2008, she really liked Obama, and she was like, this guy just makes more sense than John McCain and Sarah Palin. So she voted for Obama in 08. I think she voted Obama 2012 also, but she's sort of like that classic swing voter type. But unfortunately, I don't have the positive ending to that story, because any impact I've had on anybody, it is not my family. It is my family is perhaps one of the reasons why other people find me convincing, is because I've had to sharpen my skills on my just brick wall family that thankfully my sister and I have very similar politics. So there's that sort of, and my brother-in-law, and of course me and Crystal, very similar politics. But man, even like this Thanksgiving, you know, I'm going into it like, oh God, because everybody knows what I do for a living and they want to talk to me about it. And like, I don't really want to, my family's a classic New York Italian family, and they want to talk at you. They don't want to talk with you. They don't want to talk to you. It's like, here's my spiel, right? Like, here's my monologue. And granted, you know, I'm sure that's where I get it from. But when I'm in that environment, it's like, I don't want to have this conversation. So I walk in and I sit down, and my uncle starts going, and my mom's like,
it's always the fucking uncle, isn't it? It's always the uncle. Always the uncle. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, my mom walks in and she's like, remember, no politics. She says that to my uncle. And I was like, you know what? God bless you, Mom, because I really was not in the mood to sit here for 20 minutes while he lectures me.
Do you ever feel like you have to hide your power level? Because I struggle with that with my family. I love them dearly, but I don't, you know, like, we're an outspoken group of people, but when I have like brothers-in-law come up to me and they start running their mouths, I'm like, do we really want to get into like the interest? Yeah. So I just tend to like nod politely and and basically go from like a topographical view, not in a way that's condescending, but just because I do not want it to end up in a fist fight or some sort of like awkward encounter. Yeah.
No, I mean, look, people might guess otherwise, but I'll tell them I really don't want to have political conversations with family members. Right? There's like a scale here. And on the family scale, it's like, don't really feel like I want to talk about this right now with you or ever. And then like, there's a sliding scale. And then when it comes to friends, like, yeah, it's okay to talk politics with friends. Most of my friends are relatively somewhere on the spectrum as I am, not exactly, but in the realm. So it's like, okay to have some political conversations with friends, but like, you know, where I actually enjoy having political conversations is talking to somebody like you, talking to somebody like Crystal, or if I have to go on Piers Morgan and I have to put the game face on and get in there and get ready to debate. That's one thing. That's fine. That's okay. I like that. But in like really casual, laid back settings where I'm there to relax, like, I don't want to be on. I don't want to have to, you know, I don't want to have to bring all this stuff up from memory or have talking points ready, or I just don't like talking politics with family. I'd rather chill, sit on the couch, watch some TV, eat some good food. So like in the family setting, in the holiday setting, I don't want to talk about politics. I have no interest in talking about politics.
I totally agree. I do want to say, to kind of close the loop on this, so we're talking about family and Destiny. The last time I saw him, because I was down in Miami at his studio the day before the election, and then I flew up to DC to do a live stream with Luke Beasley, and that was brutal. You could just see the devastation on our faces as the results came in. But it's funny because every time I see Destiny, he cracks me up, because he's like, dude, do you want to see this crazy person I'm talking to who she knows every fucking MAGA talking point and she will not let up, and we argue all the time. And he'll show me these screenshots. It's his fucking mother.
My God.
It's so funny. Like, he's so funny in how he delivers it. He's like, because I'm thinking, okay, you're one of the most argumentative people I know. You're talking to some, like, either another influencer or another pundit or whatever, or just someone in your DMs. No, it's his own mom. And it's just his dry delivery of that is so funny.
Somebody's got to study that, man, that like the people who are big political influencers, like, it seems like in many instances they come from a family where like the family is not in agreement with the influencer. You know what I mean? It's like very oppositional in many ways.
Yeah, I of all the influencers and pundits I know, I don't think any of them are on the same page with their family. I think Luke is the closest one, and even then there are still some differences. But you mentioned putting your game face on Piers Morgan. So let's talk about that for a minute, because when we first talked on Crystal and Kyle and Friends, you said, and I was surprised. I mean, I wasn't surprised that the invitation had been made. I guess I assumed that they were weary or leery about having you on, but you said that you had been receiving invitations for a while for Piers Morgan Uncensored, and I told you, man, you need to go on. And I'm glad you did, because you kicked ass in that episode, and you did something that I've only ever seen. I've seen Mehdi on there, I've seen Destiny on there, and they kick ass in their own way. But you did something that I'd only ever seen Luke Beasley do, which was you got Piers Morgan to agree with you, bro. So let's talk about that. What made you finally reconsider, and what was that experience like? And would you do it again? And why is the answer yes? Of course you would.
It's sort of the same thing I talked about before, that I'm usually so I would say I'm a very like schedule oriented guy. Like, even though my politics are progressive, I would say temperamentally I'm actually very conservative. I'm an introverted guy. I like the idea of having a schedule. I like the idea of doing the same thing every day. And with Piers, it always sort of works out that when his show is on is like when I'm usually recording my show, or roughly in that time frame. And so it always felt like a hassle, or like I'd have to rush my show, or it would just sort of throw a wrench in the middle of my day. And the other thing is, like, look, let's call a spade about that show. It's like, it is built for conflict. It is not built for this platonic ideal of the marketplace of ideas where, let the truth rise to the top every time. It's like, that is not what it's for. It's for people to yell at each other. It's for entertainment value. And it does feel in many respects kind of cheap. I know that you really need to be concise in that format, and you really need to get your point out quick. And, sometimes, I mean, the format I'm used to doing is just me ranting at the camera for 2 hours, where I have all the space in the world to say whatever the hell I want to say. And so, it just all felt like a little bit too much of a hassle. Didn't know if the juice was worth the squeeze. But eventually I said yes. I guess he just caught me in a good mood. And I actually got kind of lucky, because the show was literally like the Democratic panel after the election, where he's asking like, well, what direction should the party go in and all that stuff. And so I literally had a panel of like 3 or 4 other people who were all sympathetic to my views or somewhat in alignment with my views. And so there was going to be no smoke in that area. So that just left Piers. And that's sort of yummy in my tummy, because Piers is, we all know his shtick, right? We all know his shtick. You literally mentioned it earlier. It's like, I'm a centrist and I'm an old school liberal, but let me tell you why Donald Trump is right about everything. Like, that's sort of his whole shtick. And so he messed up, because he asked me a question which I had been super prepared for, and I had been thinking about for like 2 weeks straight. This notion that like the reason Kamala lost is because she's too woke. It's like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. She didn't mention race. She didn't mention gender. She didn't say Latinx. There was nothing politically correct. There was no cancel culture. There was no conversation about trans people. There was nothing. There was nothing in that realm. She ran like Obama in 08. Race was a non-issue. Nothing. And so you asked me the thing about wokeness, and you're like, bro, you're walking right into my bear trap. I am so prepared to have this conversation, and you have nothing but your fucking fortune cookie or bumper sticker slogans that you've memorized and you regurgitate to a bunch of idiots. And so he just messed up by asking me a question that I was like super prepared for, and I was really knowledgeable on, because that argument was just driving me crazy. In the wake of the election, to have people blaming wokeness for her loss, it's like, this is nothing but an attempt to deflect and blame the left again. That's all that was. The wokeness was the problem. And so, at the end, he kind of agreed with me, but it's funny because like he just contradicted himself. He was like, I was like, hey, we should just tell the truth about Trump. How about that radical idea? And then he was like, yeah, but you guys, like, you don't even know how to do it. You need to do it with humor. And I was like, yeah, that's why I said Jon Stewart should be the nominee for 2028. And he's like, actually, you know what? You're right about that.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's huge getting that sort of concession from somebody like Piers Morgan, who, listen, to your point, he's not stupid. He knows what he's doing. I don't know if it's an ideological bent towards Trump, or if it's just because they have a long-standing friendship or whatever. But when I react to a lot of Piers' content, because whether we like it or not, that platform is blowing up. It does create interesting conversations in the sense, like the permutations of people he has on. He'll have you on, and Alan Lichtman, and Ben Shapiro, and Megyn Kelly, and Patrick Bet-David's sidekick, and like all these unhinged and varied personalities that like go into this. And it is interesting content. And he is a very influential voice. So I'm glad you actually went on and pushed back, and on your debut appearance got him to agree with you, because most of the time, I mean, he gives no ground, in my opinion, to the liberal and progressive guests when it comes to domestic politics. And when he talks foreign policy, you know, he plays more the devil's advocate there, no matter who he's talking to. He could be talking to Cenk Uygur and then Rabbi Shmuley, and he'll ask both of them tough questions. He'll play the devil's advocate. But when it comes to Trump, man, there is just this weird, and he's so dishonest about it. It's just like, if he would just come out and say, hey, listen, I was on The Celebrity Apprentice. Trump is my friend. You fucking woke people drive me nuts. And so, I listen, in the American context, I am conservative. I'm going to try to be as fair as I possibly can, but these are my priors, these are my biases, and just lay the cards on the table. I think most people would be chill about that. Then we could just disagree on the substance. But with Piers, it's like when he complains, he pearl clutches about the left's rhetoric. Kyle, your rhetoric, Kamala's rhetoric, Biden's rhetoric, guys, you gotta dial it down a little bit. And meanwhile, they say the most unhinged shit.
Insane. Trump, they're all communists. They're all fascists. There was a speaker at one of Trump's rallies that said everybody on the Democratic side are degenerates, lowlives, and Jew haters. They said everybody on the Democratic side of those things, and never comes up on Piers Morgan. He's totally fine. It's baked into the cake. Trump gets graded on with double standards. It's absurd, and it drives me crazy. And that's the other thing is like, and I've seen Cenk go on there. Cenk does a good job on there, but oftentimes he's put in a position where he has to be nuanced, and he's like, look, I agree with you about this part, but I don't agree on this part. But honestly, what I'm realizing a lot lately is even doing that, the like, oh, I agree with you on this part, but not this part, it really sort of gives into their framing in a way where people are going to walk away with, oh, so they're right. You saw this actually in the election with Kamala. Now, by the way, I should say up front, I was wrong about this. I thought this was a brilliant response at the time. Me and Crystal actually debated it on air. But when on the issue of immigration, her rebuttal was, what are you talking about? You say you're tough on immigration. We're actually tough on immigration. We did the bipartisan border bill. We had it ready to go. You made a phone call. You killed the thing. Who's really soft on the border? It's not us. We did the right thing. The problem with that is you are conceding to their framing that this is an issue which should be at the top of the list and we should care about this. And by the way, you're never going to outright wing the Republicans in the narrative war. They are always going to own that position more than you, no matter how much you talk about how right wing you are on the border. So really, you needed to flip the conversation. You need to change the conversation to your grounds where you're better. You need to say, why are we talking about this? Immigrants are not the problem. You're just trying to divide and conquer. The real problem is the donor class. The donor class has rigged our government in their favor, and they're screwing working people. I'm going to fight for the working people. But the problem is not the immigrants. The problem is that you don't have a higher minimum wage. You don't have health care. You're struggling. We're going to make sure you could pay the bills. And so that's also the mindset I took into Piers, knowing that in the wake of this election loss, I'm not feeling very conciliatory. I'm not feeling like, hey, let me tell you the 12% I agree with you on, and then I'll talk about the rest where I disagree. I'm really feeling like, no, we got to cut through all this bullshit and stop with the nonsense. And the entire conversation you're having is wrong. Here's why it's wrong, and here's the reality. That's why I flipped the thing on him on wokeness. I flipped it back on him by saying, you guys say you're concerned about wokeness. You guys say you're concerned about Democrats censoring speech. Well, here's Trump's actual record where he censored speech endlessly. And then that immediately put Piers Morgan on the defense. And that's more of what we have to do. We have to flip the conversation, reframe the conversation, and go on the offense. They need to be the ones on the defense because the stuff that they represent is insane.
It truly is. And so I guess we'll close with this. So, we gave examples of you with Rogan, you and Piers Morgan. These are two of the biggest names in alternative media. You have, again, as well as Brian Tyler Cohen, Luke Beasley, Destiny, and others have been talking about the media landscape needs to change. So as far as what you, host of Secular Talk and Crystal, Kyle, and Friends, and, being a very popular, very successful, pundit in the space and commentator, what do you plan to do differently, if anything, over the next 2 years in terms of posture, in terms of collaboration, in terms of messaging, in terms of things you talk about? What are things that you're thinking about? Because I know the rest of us are thinking about this as well.
So one of the things that I've just sort of naturally started to do, and I will keep doing, is I am at war with fake independent media. I am at war with them because there was a lot of hope for this idea of new media originally. where everybody felt like, oh shit, here's a place where people are uncensored. Here's a place where people could tell the truth. Here's a place where people are not audience captured or captured by corporate interests. Like, this is different than your CNNs and your MSNBCs and your Fox Newses. This is different. But what's happened over time is independent media is fake, and it's just as bad, if not worse, than mainstream media. You saw this happen with the likes of the Joe Rogans and the Jimmy Dore types. Of course, the right wingers are horrific. Ben Shapiro is horrible. All those people are terrible. And it makes me want to ruthlessly and relentlessly go out there and try to correct the record and call out where they're fucking bullshit and call out where they're wrong, because we are surrounded by a tsunami of horse shit. And I'm just so fed up with it, because that is part of the reason why Trump won, is that this tsunami of horseshit is out there and people didn't recognize horseshit. And so really sort of leaning into my war on fake independent media is one thing that I'm going to do. I just sort of came to that naturally. I don't really have any plans to change anything, but certainly, just try to get better at my job overall, try to be more policy focused, try to be sharper with my arguments and my talking points. Try to dispel with the bullshit no matter what direction it comes from. It's interesting because there's a little bit of a contradiction, right? We really want to expand the Democrat and liberal and leftist tent and make it as wide as possible. But also at the same time, you want to make sure that you don't have any poison pills in that tent. You don't have any people who don't belong in that tent. You know what I'm saying? So it's almost like a little bit of a contradiction. It's like you got to expand the tent, but also you need to go after the people who should not be in the tent, if that makes sense.
Right.
And
right.
so,
well, it's like you can't just let literally everybody in. There have to be some sort of common values and listen, I totally, that is going to be this coalition's perpetual struggle. Who do we let in? Because I want to say, give you some credit here. One of the disagreements that we had, I don't even know if we call it a disagreement because I was just agnostic on the issue. I thought it was sound logic, but I didn't know if it would manifest itself in results. Is the first time we talked, you were very wary about the Harris campaign embracing Liz Cheney and Never Trump Republicans. Now, their logic was, and David Plouffe talked about this with Pod Save America afterwards, again, sound logic, we have to appeal to as many people as possible. And that's a cohort that, in theory, we could get. Fair enough, David, but you didn't actually get it. Biden got less than Hillary did. Kamala got less than Biden did. So there was actually a reduction in Republican participation, at least according to the exit polls, from 2016 to 2020 to 2024. So it looks like, at least with the initial preliminary data we have, that you were right, that this was not a sound strategy. So, and again, I'm not saying that means kick Liz Cheney out or whatever. I think that if you oppose authoritarianism, as far as I'm concerned, you have a place in this tent. To me, the most important thing is to defeat the Republicans. There are other important things which have to follow. But any path we take in terms of advancing legislation, in terms of making progress, be it with respect to social safety nets, climate change, the immediate obstacle is always the Republicans. And that has to be the one unifying goal that we have. Probably more beyond that, but that is at least the prerequisite. So I totally sympathize with who do we let in, and to what extent are they given a seat at the inner table, right? Are they given basically are Liz Cheney's given the leftover chairs, or do we kick certain people out to give them a prime seat? I totally understand that. I would encourage you. Again, I saw a lot of people, they were really happy about your Piers Morgan appearance. I hope you go back and do shows like that and, get in front, because you're very good at it. You have the policy positions down. You are more concise than you give yourself credit for. And collaborations, not just like conversations like we're having here, but, with Destiny and with Packman or Beasley or whoever else, like, I feel like we do have to strengthen some of these ties. And the other thing I would say is, maybe you disagree with this. I think that we also have to find a way within this coalition to meaningfully disagree on certain policy and not be adversaries. So what I mean by that is, I'm the sort of person that I don't have to be best friends with an ally. I can have, do you know the guys from the Vanguard? Zach and Gavin.
Mm-hmm. I've been on their show a bunch.
I like them a lot. Those two, like, I'm in their chat a lot. They've interviewed me a couple of times. They're great. We disagree on some areas of policy and some strategy, but I consider them allies because at the end of the day, their beef with the Democratic Party, however well defended, they recognize that the Republican Party is just objectively worse. And so, I would grab a beer, I'd buy them a beer, I'd hang out with them. But that even if that weren't the case, even if I didn't have a genuine affection for them, I don't have to, because they're just allies in a political, in a coalition. What do you think about that? Do you think that there has to be these deep friendships, or do you think that, if let's say Vosh or Destiny or whoever it is, like two specific people who just don't like each other, that they can just have the same shared political enterprise and go forward for the next 2 or 4, years?
I mean, I agree with you completely. The only problem is it's so much easier said than done to sort of even mildly mend bridges like that. I tried this when I first got into political commentary. I remember trying to bridge a gap between Sam Harris and Glenn Greenwald, because for me at the time, well, I was
Okay.
I was kind of like so I was both. I'm old enough where I was part of that like new atheist wave, where it was an anti-religious movement brought about not only by 9/11, but like Bush's Christian fundamentalism. And it's like, we're against religion, and religion has this horrible impact on the world. But I was that mixed with sort of a Chomskyite. I had read a bunch of Chomsky books, really admire the man and think he's brilliant. And so I was part of these two worlds. And here you had Glenn Greenwald, who was a Chomskyite at the time, and you had Sam Harris, who represents new atheism, and they hated each other, and they would always go at each other so hard. And I remember doing these segments being like, let's fucking call a truce. You guys both make some good points. Let me get into the specifics, but overall here, let's handshake and go away like grown men. And like, the idea behind that is the correct idea, right? Like, if there's enough agreement, let's at the very least just be acquaintances and okay with each other, allies, right? Like you said. But it's a shame that oftentimes human nature sort of gets in the way of the things which are obviously correct. And, you mentioned a bunch of streamers, you mentioned Destiny and Hassan and Vosh and all those people. And it's like, yeah, in a world that made sense, everybody would be like, look, we might not like each other, we might not be friends, but whatever. We're largely on the same side. And unfortunately, in reality, it really works out where everybody's just taking shots at each other all the time. And me personally, I would love to see everybody sort of rise above and get to a point where the common enemy is more the focus than sniping at each other. And to your point, I would love, that's a part I forgot to mention, but I do believe this, and I will continue to do it. Since I'm so black-pilled right now about fake independent media, I'm going hard, and I plan on doing more debates, because I think it's important to sort of rep a position, rep it strongly, and get out there and lead by example, and lead by being a leader and showing people, look, here's the things that I'm fighting for. Here's what I'm arguing for. Here's why the Republicans are worse than the Democrats. Here's the way the Democrats need to improve. And, it's a long project, but there are some elements of Trumpism that we can learn from. Obviously, none of the policy stuff, obviously none of the authoritarianism, but just the bull in the China shop type thing. And like, he repped something. The thing he repped is wrong. The immigrants are to blame, trans people are to blame. That's the narrative. Hate them if you're struggling. We need to flip that narrative and expose to people it's not true that immigrants are the problem. It's not true that trans people are the problem. They are scapegoats. You have been a victim of divide and conquer, which is the oldest trick in the book that the right uses in order to let the oligarchs run out the back door with all the money. And so it's our job to correct the record and flip the narrative and explain the reality. The reality is that big money donors have corrupted our government and made it so that the government doesn't represent you anymore. And we got to fight to get a government that does represent us. And that's easier said than done. But I like a lot of the ideas that you laid out there. I would love kind of like a truce among people who might not even agree in this space, and just focus on the common enemy, No,
100%. I totally agree. I hope to see more of it. I'm inspired by what little I've seen so far, since we're just a month into the second Trump term. He's not even been inaugurated yet. So I think that there's at least potential to do that. But bro, listen, man, I appreciate it. This was awesome. I'm looking forward to future conversations like this, watching you on Piers Morgan, perhaps Joe Rogan again, eventually, if he'll have you, Lex Friedman, others as well. And if there's anything that I can ever do as far as your projects are concerned, or tag team in a debate, happy to help out. Man, I appreciate that, you giving us your thoughts.
No, thank you, brother. I appreciate you. Keep up the good work.
Yeah, likewise, man. I'll talk to you later.